Good afternoon. It's the Educated Grunt here. Welcome. This is going to be episode 6 in my series of the U.S. Army on the eastern flank of the Chosin Reservoir. Task Force Faith, the 32nd Infantry Regiment and supporting units, and Task Force MacLean, the 31st Infantry Regiments and its supporting units. I'd like to take a minute to give a shout out to a couple of my sponsors, Nick's Haberdashery. Nick's is a eBay store that specializes in gently used higher-end men's clothing and other items. Links will be in the description to the store, and give them a look. You know, you might find something you like at an affordable price. My second shout out is to Links Library. Links Libraries has a very large library on Amazon with a ton of different books, mostly nonfiction, that you can take a look at and get at a very affordable price. They're very highly rated, and I highly recommend them. With that being said, I say we just jump right in and get into our program today. The group of men that had gone with Captain Bigger, after having run the Chinese off the high ground on the west side of the road, found that there were still enemy soldiers between it and the road. Rather than fight back to the road, Bigger led his men west and south to the reservoir shore, and then out onto the ice. Another group of about 15 men, including Lieutenant Smith, who had commanded Company A, Lieutenant Richard E. Moore, one of his platoon leaders, and Lieutenant Barnes, an artillery fort observer. After knocking out one of the enemy's machine guns on the same side of the road, they watched Captain Bigger and his men heading toward the ice. They debated what they should do. They could see the trucks stalled along the road. They're out of ammunition. Deciding there was no reason to go back, they continued toward the reservoir ice. A group of 15 or 20 Chinese trying to head them off came as far as the reservoir bank and fired at them without effect. One enemy soldier, however, did follow them out onto the ice to bayonet a man who had fallen behind. 6 men of this group, including Smith, were wounded or had frostbitten feet. Lieutenant Campbell stayed with the column of trucks, following the men with Major Jones. Just before leaving the last roadblock position, Campbell happened to meet his platoon sergeant, Master Sergeant Harold M. Craig. Craig was wounded in the middle of his back and was about to throw away his carbine and rely on his bayonet, figuring that he would have to make a break for it as soon as darkness came. Craig felt his carbine would encumber him. Campbell gladly accepted the carbine. It had had a banana clip in it with 30 rounds. As the trucks moved forward, he found one with a place on the side in which he could cling. There were 5 other men clinging to the same side. It was ragged and desperate-looking column of men and vehicles. Those following Major Jones had little semblance to a military unit. Without subordinate leaders, without formation or plan, they were a mixture of remnants of all units, a large percentage being walking wounded. About 15 of the 22 original trucks were left. A mile or two beyond the roadblock, 2 burned-out tanks partly blocked the road and delayed the column until the men could construct a bypass. Beyond that, the column made a steady but slow progress for another mile or so. Some of the men began to believe they were safe. There were stragglers along the road, men who had struck out for themselves during previous delays. Some of them swung onto the passing trucks. By the time it was nearly 2100 hours, and the column, having covered more than half the approximate 10 miles between the last defensive perimeter at Huguri, approached Hudongni, the small lumber village. As the leading truck, which was some distance ahead of the rest of the column, entered the town, Chinese soldiers opened fire and killed the driver. The truck overturned and spilled out the wounded men, a few of whom managed to work back up the road to warn the rest of the column. At this point, Major Jones decided it would be advisable to get away from the road and follow the railroad tracks south. The railroad paralleled the road, but was closer to the reservoir shoreline. Some of the men had followed him. About 75 to 100 men stayed with the vehicles. An artillery officer collected all who could walk and fire a weapon and led them forward. At the edge of the village, they began to receive fire from the rifles and at least one automatic weapon of an enemy unit of undetermined size. After returning fire for a few minutes, the group returned to the vehicles. They picked up several wounded men from the overturned truck and took them back. The trucks moved a little closer to the village and halted. It was 2200 hours or later on the 1st of December, 1950. A group of officers and men decided they would wait where they were. Word of their situation, they argued, must surely have gotten through to Hugurui and would undoubtedly arrive soon. They waited for an hour or so until the rear of the column began to receive small arms and mortar fire. Then they decided to make a run for it. Lieutenant Campbell was still hanging onto one of the trucks. We'll never make it, he thought. As the column proceeded through the village, moving slowly, enemy fire killed the drivers of the first 3 trucks. The column halted, and an enemy machine gun immediately raked at point-blank range. Jumping off the tailgate of the 3rd truck, Lieutenant Campbell scrambled for the right side of the road where an embankment separated it from a small plot of cultivated ground 8 or 10 feet beneath it. In the darkness, he could see only outlines of trucks on the road and flashes of machine gun from a machine gun firing from the hill on the opposite side of the road. Leaning against the embankment, he fired his carbine at the machine gun flashes. A body and arm torn off lay nearby the road. The overturned truck, its wheels in the air, rested in the small field below the road. Someone pinned underneath it kept pounding on the truck's body. Wounded men scattered nearby screamed either in pain or for help. Up on the road, someone kept yelling for the men to drive the trucks through. Chinese soldiers closed in on the rear of the column. Campbell saw a white phosphorus grenade explode in the rear of the truck end of the column. This is the end of the truck column, he said to himself. Someone yelled, "Look out." Campbell turned in time to see a 3/4-ton truck coming over the embankment towards him. As he scrambled to one side, the truck ran over his foot, crushing the bones. Someone decided to try to get the lead vehicles off the road. Pushed by the first 3 vehicles without their drivers jammed together, rolled off the embankment and overturned. Wounded men inside were spilled and crushed. The frantic screams of these men seemed to Lieutenant Campbell like a world had gone mad. He fired his last 3 rounds at the enemy machine gun, headed for the railroad track on the opposite side of a tiny field, and dived into a culvert underneath the railroad. It began to snow again, a fine powdery snow. Everyone scattered. Corporal Comenisis, a company medic, found himself in a group of about 15 men, none of whom he knew. Carrying 6 wounded, the group reached the reservoir. As Comenisis walked out on the ice, he looked back. Several trucks were burning. Lieutenant Campbell crawled through the culvert. He found a man wounded in the leg, who could not walk. 2 other soldiers came over the embankment and joined him. Dragging the wounded man, the group walked in a crouch across the rice paddy to a large lumber pile in the middle of a field. There, 2 more soldiers joined them. At the edge of the reservoir, 3/4 of a mile away, several others joined Campbell's party. Staying close to the shoreline, the men walked on the reservoir ice. Campbell was not sure where Hugurui was, but he felt they would reach it if they followed the reservoir shore. The reservoir ice was not slippery. The wind had blown off most of the snow, leaving a rough surface crust. It was so thick that 76mm shells had ricocheted without any effect. At a North Korean house, an ROK soldier with them asked where the Marines were. He was told that American jeeps came down the road every day. Some of the group, suspicious of the North Koreans, wanted to continue across the reservoir, but Lieutenant Campbell thought he recognized the road. He led them off and the rest followed. By then, he had 17 men with him, of whom 3 were armed. 2 miles down the road, the group reached a Marine tank outpost, and the tankers directed them to the nearest command post, where a truck took them to a Marine hospital in Hugurui. Lieutenant Campbell arrived there at 5:30 a.m. on 2nd December 1950. The shell fragment in the roof of his mouth began to bother him. Individuals and other groups straggled into Hugurui for several days, beginning on the night of the 1st of December. Lieutenant Smith and those men with him who had left the column at the 2nd roadblock reached a Marine supply point at Hugurui about 22 hours that night. A plane had dropped a note in a canteen instructing them to keep away from the shoreline and continue across the ice. A little later that night, Captain Bigger hobbled in with his group. The men who went with Major Jones after following the railroad tracks for some distance had been fired on by an enemy machine gun. Many of the men took off toward the reservoir and began arriving at the Marine perimeter soon after midnight. Most of the men who served with Task Force Faith were left where the truck column stopped near the lumber village of Hudong-ni, or were strewn along the road from there to the northernmost position. When those few men who could move had left, the others were either captured or frozen. Private First Class Glenn J. Frinfrock, a machine gunner from Company D, became unconscious from the loss of blood about the time a truck column came to its final halt. It was daylight on the morning of the 2nd of December when he regained consciousness again. He began to move down the road a short distance until he found several wounded men trying to build a fire by one of the trucks in which Colonel Faith had been placed the previous evening. His frozen body was still in the cab. Since the truck appeared to be in good working order, Frinfrock and the other men tried unsuccessfully to start it. As they were working on the truck, some Chinese walked toward them from the village, and several of the men ran toward the ice. The others were captured. The Chinese gave morphine to several men, bandaged their wounds, and after caring for them for several days, freed them. Lieutenant Morchard, wounded in the knee and in the head, walked to Hugururi from the blown-out bridge. It was 0330 on the 2nd December when he reached friendly lines. Corporal Kamasis, the medic, and his group carrying the 6 wounded men, after hiding in a brush near the reservoir shore in order to rest, followed the railroad track until they came to the road leading toward Hugururi. At about 0800 hours, they met a Marine tank, and 300 yards beyond were trucks and ambulances waiting to take them to the rear. All day, other men made their way back to the friendly lines. On the 4th December, when most of the survivors had returned, the 1st Battalion, 32nd Infantry, originally counted only 181 officers and men, and detached ROK troops of the original 1,053 that began the operation. The other battalions in the perimeter had suffered equal losses. It was not the immediate end of trouble. Since the enemy still controlled much of the road between Hugururi and the port city of Hungnam, but at Hugururi, the 1st Marine Division had a solid perimeter that included the airstrip, and there were more food, ammunition, and medical supplies. From Hungnam, the more seriously wounded were evacuated by plane. For the others, 10 days of fighting lay ahead. All the equipment and vehicles of the 2 infantry battalions, the 57th Field Artillery Battalion, and D Battery of the 15th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion were lost in the fighting east of Chosin between November 27th and December 2nd, 1950. Not a single vehicle, artillery piece, mortar, or machine gun of these units was saved. This debacle is a grim contrast to the withdrawal of the Marine regiments, who successfully broke through the same enemy under the same conditions, bringing out most of their equipment and dead, and nearly all the wounded. There's a lot of controversy in this battle. There's a lot of claims by the Marine Corps that have been debunked, and I will be addressing these claims and providing some documentation that I'm going to be showing on this. This whole thing really points out the ugliness of inter-service rivalry and the pettiness. Very egregious lies made, and a lot of myths assigned to this battle. In my next episode, I will be definitely addressing those, and I will be backing my assertions with documentation from some of the key players in this battle. I'd like you to thank you once again for listening. Have a good day, and if you could do me a favor, is like, subscribe, comment, and hit the bell for notifications on my next episode. This is the Educated Grunt, and have yourself a good day now.